Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and there are many retro video game collectors and enthusiasts who believe that shopping for retro games at GameStop is a sucker move. It's not the best choice, and they have their reasons for feeling this way. And so today I wanted to talk about 7 ways to maximize GameStop in 2025. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the reasons to either use or not use GameStop, and then also discuss some of the pros and cons of using some of the alternatives to GameStop, because there are about 5 other ways that you can source retro video games in 2025, and we want to take a look and see what makes the most sense for those who are interested in building a physical collection of retro video games and retro video game consoles. And so I think this is an important discussion, especially as we come towards the end of the year, because this is the first year of GameStop's official retro store announcement, where they're actually having stores dedicated to retro video games. So let's first talk about the reasons to not use GameStop. And number 1 is going to be the poor customer service right off the bat. A lot of times when people discuss their gripes with GameStop, they talk about the lack of employee training. How when it comes to retro video games, a lot of the employees in the store know nothing about retro games. They know nothing about anything older than the Switch or the PlayStation 4. And immediately once you start talking to them about Super Nintendo, NES, PlayStation 2, they start to look at you like a deer in headlights. So this makes for a poor customer experience, especially when you're trying to kind of just discuss retro games. And so there's like a little bit of this disregard for customer satisfaction, and it seems like employees only really care about the value. As a matter of fact, I saw a video from a YouTuber who said that they walked into a GameStop where they had a complete in box Game Boy game, and the employee didn't want to sell it to her because she thought that the game might be worth something. So when you have employees that aren't really interested in the history of retro video games, but they mainly care about the value and what they can get if they decide to sell it, it really just puts a bad taste in your mouth as a collector and someone who actually wants to keep these games in your collection. And then the last point to the poor customer service piece is their constant push to upsell you with their protection plans. No one wants to buy those protection plans. I do not feel like protecting a Xbox One controller that costs $11. It just doesn't make sense. And so these reasons really put a bad taste in people's mouth when it comes to GameStop and their customer service. The second reason why a lot of people would say don't use GameStop is because of their subpar product delivery. A lot of times people are saying that GameStop is selling them fake games, or if they do decide to buy a game online and it's a disc-based game, they're only getting the disc. They're not getting the original case. They're not getting the manual. They're not getting anything like that, but they're still being charged complete in box prices. And that just doesn't really seem fair for the retro collector who understands the value of retro games. And then last but not least, when it comes to subpar product delivery, are all of the games and controllers and consoles that don't work. There are a lot of times where GameStop will sell you a video game or sell you something that just isn't functional, and then you have to spend the time to return the product, and that's going to be a whole nother topic. The last reason to not use GameStop is their pricing. Now, in the last year or so, GameStop has been consistently increasing their prices for their retro games. In fact, there was a time not too long ago where you can almost guarantee that if you went to GameStop, you were going to find retro games that were underpriced. But what GameStop started doing was, in their internal pricing system, they were updating all of their retro games in real time each and every day, which is pretty much the equivalent of going to a mom and pop shop, picking up a game, and then when you ask how much it is, they look up the price right there in front of you. GameStop just does it a little bit more discreetly, and what they'll do is their system will automatically update the price of a video game in the middle of the day, and then their employees are supposed to reprint the stickers and re-sticker those games to match whatever the price is. And in doing that, GameStop really lost their biggest advantage when it comes to someone looking to go there for retro games. The fact that they had games at a moderate price or underpriced was really the factor that made a lot of folks shop there. So those are the reasons to not use GameStop. But what would be the reasons to use GameStop? Well, there are a lot of GameStops, right? GameStop is extremely convenient. I mean, GameStop is like 7-Eleven. In most major cities, you're going to have multiple GameStops within a certain mile radius. I understand that there are some parts of the country that maybe only have one GameStop, but in those parts of the country, that GameStop might be the only game store, period, because there are no mom and pop shops and there's nowhere else to buy video games. So really, one of the biggest advantages that you get is that there are many stores, and if you do a transaction in one store, you can either complete that transaction or return whatever you bought at another store. And that does make shopping there somewhat convenient. I don't think you can discount that. Another reason to use GameStop, and this goes back to the returns, right, is that you can at least return what you buy from GameStop. Now, I've definitely heard the horror stories of people who have had struggles returning games. They've had issues. GameStop gave them a hard time, but for the most part, you can return the games that you buy from GameStop, which is different from buying something, from someone on Facebook Marketplace or doing something like that, where it's a lot harder to get a hold of the seller. I mean, once you're stuck with it, you're stuck with it. At least with GameStop, if you do just even change your mind and decide, you know what, I don't want to have this anymore, you can return it. The last reason to use GameStop is the fact that they do have somewhat of a decent points and promotion system. A lot of times people who do use GameStop, they do look forward to the promotions that they have, as well as they leverage the different points and coupons that they have. And I think that is also what makes GameStop worthwhile to a degree, especially when you consider some of the benefits and advantages of being a pro member, but we'll discuss that a little bit later on in the video. Now let's talk about the alternatives. What are the alternatives to shopping at GameStop, and what are the pros and cons of those alternatives? And we're going to look at these based on time commitment versus risk, right? And when I say risk, I mean time is money. So if you're going to invest the time in going somewhere, you have to measure that against the risk of not finding anything at all, because then it just becomes a big waste of time. So let's take a look at the alternatives. The first is yard sales. Now, going yard sale hunting is a large time commitment, depending on how extensive you do it, right? If you're just doing it in your neighborhood where all you got to do is walk around the block and maybe there's 3 or 4 yard sales in your neighborhood, then I guess that's different. But most times when people go yard selling, they're getting in their car, they're driving around to different neighborhoods, and they're looking for these games to make deals. So there is a large time commitment, and I would say the largest time commitment probably would be in yard sales. And it's also the biggest risk. Yard sales really hold the biggest risk because you could go to 10 yard sales in a day and not find anything worth picking up. And at that point, you just burnt a lot of gas, and more importantly, a lot of time that you can't get back, and you have nothing to show for it. Now, on the flip side of that coin, there is the chance that you could run into something very cool, something that you've been looking for, something that you've had on your wish list, or maybe even something very valuable, and you may be able to negotiate a very, very good deal where you're paying a fraction of the price for what the game or what the console is worth. So with yard sales, it's a large time commitment. There's a huge risk of not finding anything, but there is that chance that you can pick something up that's great. The next alternative is flea markets. Now, flea markets are a little bit less of a time commitment, but they're still a large time commitment because you're going there, you're hitting up different booths. Odds are you're going to spend at least half of your day there. And while it's not as big of a risk as doing yard sales, there still is a risk in being able to find something worthwhile. Now, odds are you will find video games at a flea market, but the thing is that the pricing won't be as good as yard sale pricing when you go to a flea market, because most of those vendors there, they have an understanding of retro games by this point. They know what prices are, and you're going to find yourself doing a lot more haggling. So not only are you spending the time going there, finding the stuff, but now you have to stand there and haggle and hope that you can get the price down to where it's worthwhile. And on top of that, with flea markets, you have a lot of competition. Not to say that you don't have competition at yard sales, because I've seen those videos, but at flea markets, you're definitely going to run into a lot more competition because there's a lot more people going there with the same mindset to do the same thing that you're doing. The third alternative is pawn shops. Now, pawn shops are less of a time commitment because, you can just go on Google Maps, you can pull up Waze, and you can find all the local pawn shops near you and really just chart out a course for how you're going to spend your day hitting up all these pawn shops. But again, when it comes to pawn shops, there is the risk of not finding anything. And I would say the risk level when it comes to pawn shops is probably right on par with flea markets, because most pawn shops are going to have video games, but are they going to be the video games that you want? Or are they going to be a bunch of Xbox One, NBA 2K 12s, right? It's really just about, it's not just about going to a place that has video games, but is the place going to have video games that are worthwhile? Are they going to have the video games that you want? And so when it comes to pawn shops, it's less of a time commitment. There is still a bit of that risk, but you do have the potential to negotiate some better deals for yourself, similar to flea markets. Now, thrift stores is another one. Thrift stores, to me, is less of a time commitment than pawn shops, because when it comes to thrift stores, there's really no haggling. The price is what it is. They have their rules, they have their policies, and you're really not going to negotiate with a thrift store employee. Now, there are days at most thrift stores where you can probably get 10% off, 15% off, 50% off. And if you go to the thrift store on those days, that's where you can maximize the deal and get the best bang for your buck. But again, with some of the changes that we've seen to thrift stores, especially thrift stores like Goodwill, a lot of these places are shipping their video games off to their headquarters, and they're selling and auctioning them off online. So when it comes to thrift stores, it's still a risk, because you're really just banking on the fact that perhaps whoever works at that thrift store isn't following policy and is just putting video games on the floor, as opposed to shipping them off to the warehouse so that they can sell them online like they're supposed to. But there's still a time commitment there. It's not as much as a flea market or a yard sale, depending on how you chart out your day, but you still run that risk there. The last alternative of the 5 is mom and pop shops. Now, mom and pop shops are probably the least time commitment that there is, because when you go to a mom and pop video game store, you know that they're going to have video games. You know that they're going to have good video games, because every mom and pop shop has that one glass case with all the grails, right? So you know they're going to have good stuff. But the downside is, the prices are going to be the worst at a mom and pop shop. They're going to be charging you full price. And a lot of times at mom and pop shops, they're going to be charging you above market value, because they do have that overhead. Now, you do have mom and pop shops that do a good job of kind of keeping the prices low, but it's still, again, going to be probably the hardest hitting to your wallet. And so while you don't have to worry about driving around and, spending gas and, looking all day to see if you can find a deal, whatever you do find, expect to pay up for it. Now, before we get into how to use GameStop in 2025, I want to discuss a very important point when it comes to retro game hunting, buying video games, and sourcing, and that's the time value of money. A lot of times people will spend 9 hours in a day and then make a video talking about how they found a $250 game for $5. But if you spend 9 hours in your day looking for that game, it really kind of just comes out in the wash. And really that just depends on how much you value your time. If 9 hours is worth $250 to you, then I guess you got a deal. But for someone who, if their 9 hours, it really equals $500, or if 9 hours to them equals $600, spending 9 hours finding a $250 game was a net loss for that person. And so this is where, time value really becomes subjective based on who you are, how you value your time, and what you spend your time doing. And so this is why when it comes to YouTube and it comes to finding games and seeing people who find games for cheap, or seeing people who pay up for games, it's really a subjective thing, because a person might go to a mom and pop shop and pay market price for a game, but for that person, depending on how they value their time, they probably find more value in just spending 30 minutes in a day to drive to a mom and pop shop, pay full price, and go home and have the rest of their day to keep on making money, as opposed to someone who maybe their time value isn't as high. And so for them, it makes more sense for them to spend 10, 12 hours in a day shopping for retro games and getting that value out of the video game. So it's a very subjective thing when it comes to that. And you have to factor that into the value of a game and the value of finding and buying a game. And I think that's super important when you start to look at all of the different ways that you can buy video games, from yard sales to flea markets to pawn shops to thrift stores to mom and pops. And I didn't even talk about things like Facebook Marketplace. I didn't even talk about things like eBay. I didn't talk about Mercari, because those are the paths of least resistance, right? So I feel like eBay, Mercari, those two sites in particular are really meant for those who really just do not care. If you're a person who has disposable income and you are not interested in wasting a single second or a single ounce of gas driving around looking for games, you're going to go that route, because again, the time value makes the most sense for you. Now, there is something to be said about the thrill of the hunt, the memories that you make while out in the field finding these games, and those are priceless, and you can put a value on that if you choose to, because that is a factor in game hunting. And so we're not going to ignore that. But again, it's all subjective, and it's all based on who you are, where you're at in your life, and how you value your time. Now let's get to the main thing. How do we use GameStop in 2025 as collectors and as folks who are building a retro game collection? Well, the first thing that I would recommend is becoming a pro member. To me, it just makes the most sense. I'm not sure what it is now. I think it's like 25 or 30 bucks. But the point of the matter is that for every month that you're a pro member, you get a $5 discount off of any game that you buy. So obviously $5, 12 months, that's 60 bucks. That covers your pro membership if you're a person who consistently hunts every month. It doesn't mean you have to be someone who hunts every day, but even if you just bought one video game a month and took $5 off every month, it pays for itself. On top of that, you get the points, right? So every time you buy a game, you get points, and those points become basically cash back or coupons for you when you decide to buy more games, or whatever it is you're gonna whatever type of purchase that you're gonna make. It becomes points for you. Also, as a pro member, I think you get like coupons that come in where you can get like an additional 30% for any trade-ins. You may get $25 off of any video game. Sometimes they throw these random promos on your account if you're a pro member, and those do come in handy. So that would be the first thing, become a pro member. The second thing is find the closest GameStops to you. That would be my second recommendation if you're going to use GameStop in 2025. That's how I would do it. You want to find the 3, 4, 5 closest GameStops to you and kind of get to know the folks in the store, because if they know that you collect retro, they know that you're looking for these types of games, you're going to build relationships. And even if they're not the best employee, you'll be able to build that relationship, and relationships do go a long way. I can testify to that. The third thing is going to be find non-retro GameStop stores that still carry retro. Do not let the whole retro GameStop thing fool you into thinking that there's only one store in your area that carries retro. That's not true. Most retro GameStops, or rather most GameStops, do take in retro trades, and it's up to the store to decide when they're going to ship those trade-ins to their designated retro store. And some stores don't do it at all. You may walk into a store that just took in a massive trade, and as long as those games have been processed into GameStop system, they'll sell it to you 9 times out of 10. You do have those anal employees and store managers who will not let you buy it. Like, the game could be sitting right in front of you with the sticker on, and they'll say, no, I can't sell it to you. I got to send it to the retro store. And that goes back to the whole poor customer experience deal, right? And you're going to run into that from time to time. But if you build solid relationships, a lot of times they'll do you a solid and they'll sell you the game. The fourth thing that I would do is leverage promotions. Like I said before, when you're a pro member, utilize your points, utilize your $5 per month. But then also look out for their buy 2 get 1. Look out for their 4 under 10 for 20, their 4 under 20 for 40. GameStop will do a lot of promos that will allow you to maximize their promotions and get a net savings of 25, 30, sometimes 40% off, which is more than most mom and pop shops on an average day. So that's definitely something that you can do to leverage that, and I definitely recommend that as well. The fifth thing that I would recommend is still keep an eye out for underpriced games. I know that GameStop isn't really in the retro, or rather the video game business. They're getting into baseball cards, Pokemon, collectibles, all types of stuff. But keep an eye out for underpriced games, because there are still those games that just fly under the radar and they don't really recognize that certain games are worth more than what they have priced. So just keep an eye out for those things. The sixth recommendation is keep an eye out for things other than video games. Controllers, memory cards, cords. These are all things that you need if you're using original hardware. You're always going to need a controller. If you're wanting to play an RPG and you need to save it, you're going to need memory cards that work with the system. And you're going to need you're going to need cords. You're going to need AV cables. You're going to need power adapters. You're going to need all these things. And GameStop sells these things. Usually they're in those little white plastic bags. Look for these things because these things will help you, and it's always good to have extra on hand because these are older systems, they're older consoles, these things will break down, and so you'll want to have these items available to you in the event you need them. And usually GameStop has these severely underpriced. Most of their controllers are half off with the exception of maybe like Sega Genesis and PlayStation controllers, but a lot of times their controllers are super cheap. I recommend picking those up. The last way that you can use GameStop in 2025, this is my recommendation, is know when to sell to GameStop and when to trade to GameStop. There are certain times in the year where GameStop will give you extra trade-in credit for your games, for anything that you're trading in, systems, so on and so forth. And so I would leverage those times, not for everything. You don't want to sell everything to GameStop, but what you do want to sell to GameStop is the stuff that no one else will take. I mean, if you have other ways of getting more money for your retro games, obviously you want to pursue those avenues first. Sell them to people who will pay the most money for them. Utilize them as trade bait to get other gaming items of value that you really want. Use them the best way you can. And then outside of that, take the stuff that no one else is buying and then take that stuff to GameStop, because you know GameStop will give you something for it, and something is better than nothing. Also, you have to look at how much you have invested into the stuff that you're selling. If you got a lot of stuff that you got for free, it really isn't costing you anything to sell it to GameStop, regardless of how little they're giving you for the games, especially if it's just the path of least resistance. Remember, time value. There's a time value factor to everything that you do, and sometimes it just makes more sense to just get rid of a bunch of stuff at GameStop than spending weeks, days, months trying to figure out how you're going to maximize the dollar for it. Sometimes it's best to just cut bait and move on. But those are my thoughts. Those are my 7 ways to use GameStop in 2025. Let me know what you think about this just comprehensive overview of GameStop and utilizing GameStop. Do you think folks that shop at GameStop are suckers? Do you think that paying market price for video games means you're an idiot? I'm interested to know your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.